Now, we've all heard about the CrossMedia Measurement Initiative from the World Federation of Advertisers and the Association of National Advertisers, the ANA here in the US. We've particularly heard about virtual IDs as a secure approach to identity resolution. But there's still confusion about exactly how these VIDs work and what they can and can't do. So I'd like to welcome Ron Pinelli of the Media Rating Council, who's going to give us a tutorial on these virtual IDs and their companion private sketches. And when he finishes, he'll be joined by Artie Bulgrin, who's consulting with the ANA. And both Ron and Artie will explain more about the technical blueprint that's being proposed. And then Artie will also welcome a panelist, a group of panelists who will discuss more about planning their potential pilot test. So welcome, Ron.
Thanks, Jane. So my name is Ron Pinelli, Senior Vice President of Digital Research and Standards with the Media Rating Council. And I've been asked here today to try to give a 10-minute tutorial on what virtual IDs are, or what the VID is, and how it works in conjunction with private sketches as part of some of the plans that have been published by WFA, ANA, and ISBA related to cross-media measurement. And this isn't something that MRC has designed. It's just something that we've been exposed to in the various forums by repetition. And I think because of that, can articulate how it fits into the bigger plan of the ANA blueprint, which we'll be covering in a panel shortly after my session. So this slide is a snippet of what is a bigger blueprint that the ANA has designed related to cross-media measurement. And in the next panel, we're going to be going into a little bit more detail, but why this is being shown related to VID is to understand where it fits into the infrastructure. The first thing that I want to point out about this slide is that you'll notice that it's broken into two phases, a setup phase and a measurement phase. And what's important to understand about VID is that VID is essentially a vehicle that needs to be filled in with variables that's trained as part of this panel matching process. And that's contemplated in the ANA's design. In a nutshell, a large scale input data is used as part of this setup phase, as part of a double blind panel matching process that is matched against a vendor's panel. And this can be a cross-media panel that's single sourced, or it can be various panels for various media that are linked in accurate ways. And we're going to get into a little bit more detail about how the panels work. But the point of this process is to train the VID model to fill in the variables. Once the VID model is trained, the VID model is intended to be applied in this bottom part, or the measurement phase, on first-party systems to individual record level data. So not only do I want to point out that distinction that the VID model needs to be trained as part of a setup phase and then deployed as part of a measurement phase, what I also want to point out is you'll notice at the point on this chart with the application of the VID model, it's still not privacy safe. There needs to be privacy controls that are applied on top of that VID applied data before it can be processed for reach and frequency and duplication. And I'm going to get into all those details on how VID works and the interplay on the next few slides. So VID at a very high level is an identity graph, to be simplistic. What VID does is VID is an approach to assign record level data instances to demographic or behavioral groups. So to the extent that there's records that occur in first-party data sets, the VID model will attempt to determine which demographic cohorts those records belong to. And it does it through a combination of probabilistic and deterministic approaches that I'll be discussing on the next slide. So I mentioned it's an identity graph, and you've probably heard a bunch about identity graphs and how they work. And all of them really have in common this concept of deterministic versus probabilistic approaches. And the VID approach is no different. The VID model starts by saying, is the record I'm trying to assign a record that is known, that's been encountered before? If the answer to that question is yes, the VID model will maintain or retain the characteristics of that known record. That's the deterministic aspect of the model. And by known, what we mean here is either first-party data sets that have been matched to opted-in panelists, or previously observed identity like cookies or other IDs or logged in users. if the record that the vid model is attempting to assign a demographic has not been observed before as part of the identity graph, that's where the probabilistic approach kicks in. And that's where that matching process on the setup phase from the previous slide helps inform and train the vid model to determine a probability that the record belongs in the demographic cohort, as well as a probability for duplication. And what this will do then is this will enable data to be labeled in a common way for eventual reach and frequency processing and duplication that we'll explain a little bit further. So vid, as you might imagine from the setup and the discussion about the panel, requires a training data set, as most identity graphs do. In the design for ANA, WFA, and ISBA, the training data set is intended to be a market level panel. Now, it's important to distinguish the way the panel is used in this design versus the way a panel may be used in other measurement products that you may have experience with. For example, in the United States, the television currency uses a panel, and in that instance, the panel is the measurement of record. It is where the media behavior is measured, and then that is projected to the universe. In this orientation, the panel isn't the measurement of record. The first-party data sources are the measurement of record, and the panel is only used to adjust that data and train the vid model. Now, the first-party data sets all have issues, they have limitations, biases, et cetera, and that's why the panel matching process is important. But the panel still is important and has to be of good quality. It has to be cross-media. And as I mentioned previously, it can be single source, but it also can be several providers, such as a digital panel and a television panel connected in an accurate way. It has to be probability-based. It has to have cross-media coverage. But if you think about the difference in the way the panel is used here versus where the panel is the measurement of record, the sample size doesn't have to be as robust. In a fragmented media landscape, when you're trying to use a panel as the source of measurement, you have to have sufficient sample size so it's statistically reliable when you project. But here, when you're not projecting and you're just adjusting, the panel doesn't have to be as robust for all those different media cohorts and demographics. It still, however, has to be of sufficient quality because it may need to fill in areas of missingness in the first-party data, like things such as OTA, where there isn't good first-party robust data. And as I mentioned in the structure previously, the ANA design contemplates a double-blind match process, where first-party data can be privately matched to the panel data to train the vid. Once the vid is trained, it needs to be periodically updated. And determining the cadence of the updates is part of some of the things that ANA and WFA and others are testing, because you want to make sure that it's as infrequent enough to have stability in the model, but also frequently enough to keep up with the change in media. So I've spent a few minutes talking about what vid is. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what vid is not. Vid is not a unique ID. As I mentioned, vid only labels record level data consistently for reach and frequency processing. It determines the probability that a record falls in a demographic group. It does not create a persistent unique ID that can be matched across data sets. It does not enable re-identification. It does not enable targeting and outcomes measurement. And in fact, that's by design, because if re-identification was enabled by vid, it would violate some of the very privacy principles that it's trying to adhere to. Speaking of privacy, vid is not a privacy approach. So oftentimes people ask, tell us how the vid model constructs private reach and frequency. And the answer is it doesn't. So if you think back to this chart and where I said the vid model is trained and then brought down to the measurement phase to be applied, at that point, the vid applied data is not yet private. Privacy controls need to be applied to it before it can be shared and processed. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about how privacy approaches are designed to work in conjunction with the vid model. Privacy algorithms and cardinality estimators are designed to be applied to the vid applied data, as you recall from that data flow diagram that I just went through. So before the vid record level data can be shared off of the first party systems, privacy has to be applied to that. And that's usually done by both encrypting the data and adding noise to the data. Once that's done, then privacy sketches that are constructed, which are aggregates of the vid applied data, can be shared externally and processed for reach and frequency in a centralized manner for outputs in the design of the cross-media measurement system. Now, there have been privacy algorithms that have been provided or suggested at the WFA level, and it's important that they be subjected to peer review as well as tested at the market level. One more slide before I conclude. That is, you might have recalled earlier that I said that VID doesn't create a unique ID, does not create a persistent ID, and does not allow targeting or outcomes measurement. And also that VID works on a deterministic and probabilistic approach. Now, the deterministic or known records, as those disappear, and they may in the measurement marketplace, such as when cookies get deprecated or IDFA or other privacy restrictions, then the probabilistic aspect of the VID model has to work harder and it becomes less accurate. You may have heard of SUMID or Secure Universal Measurement IDs, which are proposals for consistent or persistent IDs that can be matched across data sets. They would fill in the blanks for the deterministic aspects of VID and are designed to work in combination with VID. So SUMID and VID are not competing concepts. They don't outdo each other. They work together in that if SUMIDs can be created, they will enable more advanced targeting and measurement and also fill in some of the deterministic blanks for VID. So the last thing that I wanted to end with is, while I've talked about VID and the concept of VID and the design of VID, it's very important to note that VID has to be thoroughly tested and vetted. And there are tests that are planned underway, some of which you're going to hear about at the ANA and the WFA in the next panel, to test this with real digital and linear data to account for things like television viewing and household and device level data, converting that to persons, etc. There have been several desktop or theoretical reviews of VID. Some have been complementary, some have been contrarian to VID, and a lot of the concerns and questions in them are being contemplated in the test designs. But it's very important that VID is tested at a local market level as it's planned by ANA and ISBA, and that there are adjustments made to it or alternatives explored if there are issues in terms of accuracy with identifying information and processing reach and frequency. So that was a bit of a whirlwind, but hopefully informational. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Artie Bulgrin, a consultant to the ANA. And Artie and I are going to be spending some time going into more detail related to the ANA's cross-media measurement plan. And then we're going to introduce our panelists who will talk a little bit more detail about the planned pilot to test the cross-media measurement approach.
Thank you, Ron. The virtual ID is a core element of the ANA's cross-media measurement blueprint, and we're going to touch on that a little further in a moment. So let's get started. First, just as a reminder to those who don't know, after this, since the beginning, since we launched this last year, what is the mission of the ANA's cross-media measurement initiative? Well, it's fairly straightforward. Our goal is a marketer-led system of unified campaign measurement, restoring essential metrics of deduplicated reach and frequency across all media. And this will address 4 key areas. First, in terms of consumer behavior and media transparency, to provide a consumer-centric, objective, and completely transparent view of ad exposure across all media. From a planning perspective, to enable planning and optimization for deduplicated reach and frequency across all media channels, to improve efficiency and consumer experiences. In terms of campaign evaluation, the ability to evaluate the complete and cumulative effects of a campaign delivery across all media channels and devices, including the value of specific media channels. And then finally, in terms of outcome and ROI, to improve the precision of decision-making leading to greater ROI and value across all effectiveness measures. Now, it's important to note that the ANA has, and Ron alluded to this, the ANA has partnered with the WFA for some time now in publishing its guidelines for cross-media measurement, and continues to collaborate with the WFA on delineating common or global and local aspects of the solution, such as VID. A key local aspect of the ANA's work is the focus on television measurement, which is complex in terms of the multitude of sources for television audiences these days, both addressable and non-addressable. Also, you just heard Ron from the Media Rating Council, and the MRC, it's important to note, is a key partner and advisor of the ANA on this project. And that's mainly to ensure that our processes and design is consistent with required cross-media measurement standards. Now, the ANA's measurement model, or blueprint, is designed to use a first-party data-driven approach for measurement due to the fragmented nature of media. It also assumes that these media, including television, will become increasingly addressable and measurable going forward. We have also created the blueprint with the goal of fitting best-in-class vendors to each task. So right now I'd like to bring Ron back to provide a brief overview of the ANA cross-media measurement blueprint and the solution building projects underway to address various aspects of this plan. Ron?
Thanks, Artie. So the next slide has a macro view of some of the slides that I previously covered in the vid tutorial session. And you'll notice if you look at the red box in the upper right, the vid ID model and it being deployed, that was where we showed vid being trained and deployed. This is a bigger view, and this view is a bit complex. It's a bit busy, but it's here for a few reasons. One, to show the scale and detail and complexity of this. Also to show how much it's been thought out at the ANA in terms of how it fits together, but for you to also understand how the process works. And again, like that previous chart that I showed, it's broken up from top to bottom in a setup phase and a measurement phase. And you may recall that I said that the measurement or the setup phase is designed to train the VID model or the vid. And you can see that occurring. So in this enterprise box in the top left, you have presumably first-party data sets that have agreed to participate in this setup phase. And this can be anything from demographic enrichment providers to television data sets to sessionized digital data sets for both advertising as well as content. And the intent here is for those first-party data sets to be matched as part of the secure cloud architecture, which is this orange cloud. This would be something that is vendor maintained as part of the ANA project, where the vendor in the top right-hand side also is bringing to bear panel assets. And I say vendor, but it can also be vendors. And previously when I was talking about a panel, the requirements of the panel to do this are that it has to have robust cross-media coverage. And that may be difficult to do with a single source provider. So the ANA blueprint also contemplates that there might be multiple vendors in this top right quadrant that are bringing in enriched cross-media data sets, as well as potentially disparate panels that are able to be linked together in an accurate way. What happens is the panelists are opted in for their data to be collected across media and matched to data sets. So in this double-blind architecture, in a secure clean room environment, the first-party data set is able to be matched against the opted-in panelists, and only that matched data is then queried and analyzed for the training. So that preserves data rights and permissions as well as privacy, but it provides a very rich matched first-party data set that corresponds to the panel assets. This is done for two reasons. One, it is done to train the virtual ID model, and I just walked through that previously on how the observed matches and behaviors create the probabilistic engine for the virtual ID. It's also done to help adjust and fill in television data where necessary. So if you think about the top left quadrant, a lot of the digital data coming in is census. It's complete for its particular platform or publisher. Not so for television, because the data that's coming in is either an MVPD data set or set-top box or manufacturer data set, which is limited to the footprint of that provider. There is no one single source of census for television. That needs to be accounted for in the vid model, and part of this setup phase is to do that, to account for that and help account and adjust for our aggregated television data. The virtual ID model is then trained, and as I said previously, it's a vehicle where the variables are filled in. That's then able to be applied down in the second phase of this, which is the measurement phase. Again, we're talking about first-party data sets on first-party servers. So at this point in the bottom left quadrant of the plan, no data has left any of the first-party systems. They're able to take the variables from the vid model down as part of open source code library architecture and apply that on their first-party systems. They'll either be doing that directly if they're a large first-party provider, or they may engage vendors or aggregators to do that on their behalf. But the point is the vid model, and you can see the vid model, there are several boxes in the bottom left, is individually applied to the data sets. As you may also recall from my previous session in the tutorial, at this point, the data is still on the first-party servers and it is not privacy safe. It's record level and it cannot be shared externally. This is where the privacy algorithms that are also being developed fit in, because the data is then converted to privacy sketches. And what that does essentially is encrypt the data, add noise to the data so it's not able to be re-identified, and creates aggregates in the demographic cohort so that the data can be shared, but can also be processed for reach and frequency. Then the data can externally lead to this purple cloud, which is a reach and frequency or deduplication engine. Again, that would be maintained by an independent third-party vendor as part of the ANA design. The vendor then would process aggregate reach and frequency at the demographic levels and produce standardized reporting as part of a user interface, as well as APIs to have the data be available in other tools. And it's hard to read on this slide, but the details in the red box are that the intention is to be reach and frequency, deduplicated reach and frequency across media. And you heard Artie also say inclusive of viewability, duration, and future state things like ROI and outcomes, which are not part of the initial design. Now, the only other thing that I wanted to do is switch forward to the next slide to show how this is being put in motion by the ANA. So there, you'll see green boxes overlay this schematic as well as red boxes. The red boxes on the outside represent common components. You heard Artie say ANA is working with WFA to design some common consistent components of this. But it's very important that there's market level specificity, which is what the ANA blueprint is bringing to bear. And the ANA's solution building projects are represented by the green boxes. So you can see that the WFA plans inputs and outputs, panel matching, infrastructure testing, vid model, as well as reach and frequency. And so too does the ANA. While there may be common code that is developed at the WFA to deploy, that code and the variables within it need to be filled in by the local market tests and solution building projects. So ANA has one first to decide on the outputs the system will produce, then to map that back to inputs and data, which MRC has already assisted with in creating a data schematic. It needs to be an SLA in terms of data provided and formatting so that it can work in the system. Likewise, you heard me conclude the vid and privacy session by saying it needs to be tested. So there's a solution building project to test vid for local market TV and digital data, as well as the privacy sketches to determine whether they need to be adjusted. And then finally, you'll notice this green box across the top, which is a solution building project for data experimentation, because even when vid is trained and tested and validated and inputs are settled on, you have to get all the plumbing and pipes together to make sure the types and volume of data that's intended to flow through the system can be handled. And those are all part of the solution building projects that ANA has kicked off recently and will be working through to get to a pilot that I know Artie and the other panelists want to talk a little bit more about. Artie?
Thank you, Ron. Terrific job. So with that as background, let's bring in the rest of our panel. We have Kanishka Das, also known as KD, Director of Digital Analytics at Procter & Gamble, Tony Fagan, VP Data Science and Machine Learning at Google, and Kavita Vazirani, EVP Insights and Measurement at NBCUniversal. Welcome, panel. Thanks for your time and for being with us today. KD, I'm going to start with you. This is a marketer-led measurement initiative. And so what makes this approach different than anything out there today, and what's your vision for this initiative?
Thank you, Artie, and thanks a lot to Ron for that wonderful explanation of the blueprint. Artie, I think it's a really good question as to why this is different and how do we see this moving forward. I think one major way in which this is different is that in the past, there were a lot of great efforts which have built our body of knowledge around cross-media measurement. However, they have been limited in scope. They have been either digital only among just, works really well in collecting digital impressions, or they have been at times, television only or just only, right? But for the first time, I think in some years, we are looking at a solution that truly can bring in digital and television at scale across all the screens, always on, right? This kind of a framework hasn't happened before. And I think in the past, there used to be some hesitation that people had about data sharing, about privacy, about ID. Is that we now are being implemented as we speak, which preserve privacy, which preserve and protect consumers and the promises that we, our publisher partners, broadcasters, digital platforms have made to consumers. So those concerns, have gone away or can go away. And we should be able to really make this work. I think the other part where where there is a difference versus previous efforts is just how, we have to take heed of the consumer. In the past, perhaps there used to be a distinction between digital experiences and television experiences. But now, if you think about it, from a consumer standpoint, there's not much difference between a digital content that's on a big fat TV screen or traditional linear content on a platform or streaming services, whether they're consumed on a big screen or on mobile, right? So we have to take heed of the consumer behavior and think about how do we then align our campaigns, our planning and optimization to that consumer behavior so that we have a full, complete view of them and their ad exposure and are able to tie that back into our brand building efforts.
Thank you, KD. Kavita, let's turn to TV for a moment. There's so much going on in the world of television, new digital platforms, streaming, advanced targeting, and addressable advertising emerging. It has clearly evolved into a multi-platform medium. So where does cross-media measurement fit in your priorities, and what impact can this solution have on your business going forward?
So cross-media measurement really, Artie, has been at the core of how we operated. As you know, in early 2018, we shared our vision of measurement that unifies exposures across all screens and all platforms by introducing C-Flight. Our objective with C-Flight was to really provide clients with the most comprehensive view of their ad exposures across all screens, so they can plan video holistically across our portfolio and capitalize on the media consumption that we know is accelerating across the ecosystem. Last week, you may have also seen the press around the UK government using Sky's One campaign, which is also supported by C-Flight to launch its COVID outreach ad campaign. So whether it is the rollout of C-Flight across NBCU and Sky, or the launch of Peacock and more recently One Platform, this vision is more important to us than ever before. So regardless of what screen our consumers are watching content, we are committed to helping brands really deliver their marketing messages in a premium brand safe environment. So simply said, cross-media measurement is an important part of our investment in the future. And I think this initiative is going to help solve one of the biggest challenges marketers face, right? As a former marketer, I remember how we had to manually estimate reach and frequency across our overall media plan as well as across platforms. So we believe this can actually help transform how we think about cross-platform metrics and enhance what the future looks like for measurement.
Thank you, Kavita. Well said. Tony, along with Facebook, Google, you have invested time and resources in the WA initiative globally and now collaborating with marketers and TV media such as NBCU in the ANA initiative locally. How are the global and common and local initiatives, or the global/common and local initiatives connected, and what's at stake for you?
Thanks, Artie. There are certain pieces of this system, components as you call them, that will be common in whatever country or implementation you have. And so it makes sense to write those once and make them available through the open source process for any country and any company to be able to use in building a local system, okay? And I think we have a pretty good plan together now about how those global components and local components fit together. And we're meeting regularly across the work streams at the WFA level to actually implement these and make that software available. And for us at Google, it's really important for us to meet the needs of advertisers. And we've heard loud and clear over the past few years that advertisers want cross-media measurement. And so the challenge for us has been how to do that at scale across as many countries as possible and across as many media, and how to do it in a way, a privacy safe way that we can actually share our data. And so we're confident that the current proposal is going to meet our needs.
Thanks, Tony. Ron, the MRC is all about quality standards. And it's the reason why the MRC has been a part of this since the beginning, to ensure that the ANA embarks on this, knowing that along the way we are adhering to those standards. Can you talk briefly just about the overall importance of standards and quality in this particular effort?
Sure, and you're right. We've been involved, I think, in the beginning in WFA and ANA and to some extent ISBA's initiatives here. And really, it's just to further our mission, which is to secure for the industry measurement that's valid, reliable, and effective. And that's what we've tried to do as part of these projects, is to observe, to help serve as a consultant. You mentioned our standards. We put a lot of work into the standards we wrote 2 years ago. We believe in them. At the same time, we're not necessarily pushing them, but we're here that if there are questions about, well, why did we make the decisions we made for our standards, we can provide that insight, and it can be reflected in the design here. And we're trying to do other things as well. We're trying to ensure equity. We're trying to inject reality in terms of some of the things that this will take to do. It's a lot to do, and there's a lot that needs to be done. We're trying to make sure that the vendor selection processes can withstand scrutiny, and that they're fair and they're based on requirements. And we're also doing this with an eye for validation. You might have looked at this and said, hey, there's a lot of data flowing in the system. There needs to be a process to make sure that the data is collected consistently in a standardized way, that it all fits together and that it's collected accurately. And we believe that ultimately to be our role too, to help validate the system and make sure that it's executed against the standards that we've written.
Thank you, Ron. And I think we only have a few minutes left. I'm going to start with Katie for this last question with time in mind here. It's been a long time. It's taken a long time to get to this point right now, where there is initiative, both global and local initiatives going on in terms of cross-media measurement, KD. What's the significance of doing this? What are the ramifications of not doing this?
Artie, it's a great question. I think the significance of doing this really first and foremost is the consumer experience. And we all, as an industry, as marketers, as publishers, as anybody who has a relationship with the consumer, with the user, with our viewers, with our audience, we owe it to them to deliver a great experience. And what we are noticing is that today, with everything that's happening around us, with the fragmentation, with the loss in data, with the loss of understanding, the loss of metrics, we're not able to deliver that experience. They are faced with too far, like, annoying as, irrelevant, not useful as. So we owe it to them to deliver a great experience. If we do not come together on this initiative, I think that's the biggest risk that I see, right? Now, I think, of course, operationally, as marketers, as industry folks, we can all look at this initiative and talk about how there could be more growth in our industry because we got this right, because we were able to figure out the right reach and frequency, combine that with the right creative so that we could get to that, that promise of reaching people with the right message, the right time, and all of that, right? If you're able to do that, then we can be more efficient. We can reinvest dollars where it really matters the most and really reward great creative, great media experiences, big fat TV screens, and all of that. So I think the ramifications of not getting it right is we lose out on these opportunities. So again, it's a great opportunity for us to come together.
Thank you, KD. Kavita, significance of doing this, ramifications of not doing this.
So I think, the significance is that for us, we've always been committed to delivering the best ad experience, best consumer viewing experience, and delivering impact for our advertisers. So if this initiative can help us amplify and complement what NBC has already offered in the marketplace through C-Flight, then it's a great win for us, for the industry, for our advertisers. Ramifications, I think we have to solve this. It is a big challenge for the industry, but it is a ongoing ask that we get from our clients that we need to tackle. And while I appreciate and understand the ambitious ask that the the advertisers have put in front of us, we cannot do this alone, right? We have to work together across publishers, across platforms, across advertisers, and really evaluate the scope of work that's involved in doing this and what business impact it's going to drive for all of us. But, you know, I am really looking forward to it because it will help us potentially solve the biggest challenge in the industry.
Thank you, Kavita. Tony, we've got about a minute left. You've got the last word. Significance of doing this, ramifications of not doing this.
Well, we've already put a lot into this. And so I don't think anyone wants to go back to how life was before we started this project with a patchwork of partial solutions. So I really feel like there's no choice. Now is the time. We have the momentum. We have the cooperation. We have some of the technical capability to actually build something like this that maybe didn't even exist a few years ago. So I think we have to get it done. There's just no choice.
Thanks, Tony. We've run out of time. Panelists, Katie, Tony, Kavita, well done. Thank you for your time. And a big round of applause, if we can hear it, for Ron Pinelli, who did extra duty today. Well done, Ron, making a very complex subject a little more understandable. Thank you very much, and back to you, Jim.